The Galactic Conclave was always a spectacle. Hundreds of species converged on the sprawling orbital station known as Nexus Prime, each displaying their cultures, achievements, and most importantly, their unique culinary traditions. For many, it was the highlight of interstellar diplomacy, a chance to boast through food. This year, Earth's delegate was Thomas Calder, a mid-level diplomat whose main credential seemed to be his unflappable demeanor. He wasn't an ambassador, a scientist, or even a chef, but when the Earth Council needed someone to represent humanity at the last minute, Thomas was their guy. Just smile, nod, and don't offend anyone his supervisor had advised before he left Earth. Now, standing in front of an ornate banquet table laden with shimmering dishes, he wondered if he was in over his head. Ah, the human. The voice was smooth and mocking, belonging to a tall, insectoid alien with glittering emerald eyes. Its name was Reflar, a member of the Ruvan species, known for their competitive nature and outsized appetites. You must try the marinated crevache tendrils. They are a delicacy across 3-star systems. Thomas smiled politely, lifting a small portion with the strange, scissor-like utensils provided. The tendrils wiggled on his plate, and he did his best to suppress a grimace as he took a cautious bite. The taste wasn't bad spicy, with a texture somewhere between calamari and overcooked asparagus. Not bad, he said, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. Reflar's antennae twitched. Not bad? That's all? Surely your species can appreciate the complexities of the flavor profile. Or is it that humans simply lack the capacity to indulge? Thomas tilted his head. What do you mean by lack the capacity? Reflar laughed, a sound that resembled chimes in a windstorm. Everyone knows humans have laughably small appetites. While most species celebrate through feasts and consumption, humans nibble like grantflies. Tell me, how does your species survive on such meager sustenance? Thomas resisted the urge to roll his eyes. He'd already seen how humans were viewed here weak, unremarkable, and utterly unsuited for the grandiosity of galactic life. It was exhausting, but he wasn't about to take the bait. We eat what we need, he said evenly, but I wouldn't call it meager. Reflar grinned, a predatory gleam in its eyes. Would you care to prove it? Before Thomas could respond, another alien joined the conversation, a squat, amphibious creature with a voice like bubbling water. Are you proposing a contest, Reflar? You know humans would lose. Their single stomachs can't compete with Ruvan biology. Reflar's grin widened. Precisely. But it would be amusing, no, to see how long the human lasts before conceding. Thomas set his utensils down, his eyes narrowing slightly. All right, he said, his tone casual. What kind of contest are we talking about? Reflar's antennae perked up in surprise. You. Accept. Sure, Thomas said with a shrug. But let's make it interesting. You pick the food. I pick the format. The gathered aliens murmured with intrigue, their attention fully on the human now. And what format would you choose? Reflar asked, amusement lacing its voice. A timed meat-eating challenge, Thomas said. The room fell silent. For many species, meat was a rare delicacy, prized for its energy density and the effort required to procure it. A contest centered around meat consumption wasn't just bold, it was almost absurd. Reflar laughed again, this time with genuine delight. Very well, human. We shall prepare the finest meats from across the galaxy. You may have your challenge. Within hours, the banquet hall was transformed into an arena. Long tables were set with platters of alien meats, seared Zindra ribs, roasted Farkle steaks, spiced Corvan shanks, and a variety of other worldly dishes that steamed, sizzled, or glowed faintly in the dim light. Competitors from several species volunteered to face off against Thomas, each confident in their ability to out-eat a human. Reflar took center stage as the self-appointed announcer. Ladies, gentlemen, and sentient beings of all forms, witness the first Galactic Carnivore Challenge, where we shall discover just how much meat a human can consume before admitting defeat. The crowd cheered and Thomas took his place at the table, flanked by towering Ruvans, hulking Zeprocles, and a serpentine alien with 3 jaws. Despite the intimidating lineup, he felt oddly calm. The timer was set for 30 minutes, and the rules were simple: eat as much as possible before time ran out. Ready. Riflar's voice rang out. Begin. The competitors lunged for the platters, their movements frantic and determined. Thomas, however, took a different approach. He started with the zinder ribs, carefully stripping the meat from the bone with practiced efficiency. Years of family barbecues and friendly eating competitions had taught him the importance of pace and precision. Around him, the aliens were devouring their meals with varying levels of success. The Zeprocles ripped through steaks like paper but struggled with the tougher cuts. The serpentine alien's 3 jaws allowed it to process food quickly, but its smaller body meant it began to slow after just a few plates. Thomas kept going, his methodical approach drawing curious glances. He didn't just eat, he strategized, choosing dishes based on texture and ease of consumption. Halfway through, the first competitor dropped out, clutching their midsection and groaning. Others began to falter soon after, their once confident expressions replaced by discomfort. But Thomas showed no signs of stopping. He moved on to the Corvin shanks, savoring the smoky, spiced flavor as he worked through the pile. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he didn't let up. As the final minutes ticked down, only Thomas and a single Ruvan remained. Riflar looked on with a mix of disbelief and fascination as the human continued to eat, his pace unwavering. When the timer finally buzzed, the table was a battlefield of empty plates and discarded bones. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression triumphant but calm. Riflar approached, antennae drooping in shock. You have consumed more than any Ruvan. How is this possible? Thomas wiped his hands with a napkin, flashing a tired grin. I told you, humans don't eat like this every day, but when we do, we go all in. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, their earlier mockery replaced by genuine admiration. Even Riflar couldn't help but nod in respect. From that day forward, the legend of the human's appetite spread across the galaxy, a testament to the unexpected tenacity of Earth's most unassuming species. The celebration following Thomas's unexpected victory lasted well into the night, with aliens of every shape and size coming forward to congratulate him. While some offered genuine praise, others were clearly still grappling with the shock that a human of all species had out-eaten their champions. Riflar, in particular, was having difficulty accepting the outcome. It hovered near the edge of the banquet hall, its glittering emerald eyes fixed on Thomas, as though trying to decipher a puzzle. I do not understand, Riflar muttered, more to itself than anyone else. The mathematics do not align. A species with such modest appetites, yet capable of this feat. Meanwhile, Thomas was surrounded by a small group of curious aliens asking increasingly absurd questions. Does your species train from birth for consumption? Challenges a spiny Borvax inquired, leaning forward eagerly. Do humans have a secondary stomach hidden somewhere in their anatomy? Asked a curious Rerollin with translucent skin, who peered at Thomas as if hoping to spot the alleged second stomach. Thomas chuckled, shaking his head. No secret stomachs. And no special training either. Just good old-fashioned determination and maybe a little practice from college eating contests. College. Contests, the Rerollin asked, its glowing veins pulsing brighter with interest. Thomas smirked. Yeah, back on Earth, eating competitions are mostly for fun. Some people train for them, but for the rest of us, it's just something to do for laughs. Hot dogs, pies, pizza, you name it. The aliens exchanged baffled glances. The concept of eating for amusement rather than survival or status seemed entirely foreign to them. Riflar finally stepped forward, its antennae quivering with what could only be described as determination. Human, your performance has sparked significant interest among the Ruvan delegation. We are requesting no, demanding a rematch. The room fell silent. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Another contest? Already. Yes, Riflar said, its voice firm. The first challenge was insufficient. If you are truly as skilled as you claim, then you should have no issue competing again, this time with a proper Ruvan lineup. Thomas leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. And what makes this proper lineup any different from the first? Riflar's grin was sharp and calculating. The Ruvan carnivore elite are en route to Nexus Prime as we speak. They are champions from our homeworld, trained from hatching to consume vast quantities with speed and efficiency. If you wish to defend your species' reputation, you will face them. The murmurs of the crowd swelled, and all eyes turned to Thomas. He considered the challenge for a moment. His stomach was still recovering from the first contest, but he wasn't one to back down, especially not after all the sneering and mocking he'd endured earlier. "All right," he said with a shrug. "Let's do it. Just give me a little time to rest up." Reflar's grin widened. "Excellent. The contest will take place tomorrow at high noon." The next day, Nexus Prime's central arena was packed with spectators. Word of the rematch had spread like wildfire, drawing delegates and travelers from all over the station. Thomas stood at one end of the long table, his expression calm but focused. Across from him sat the Ruvan Carnivore Elite, three imposing figures with glistening exoskeletons and the practiced confidence of seasoned competitors. The table between them was a visual feast. It was stacked high with roasted farkle haunches, sizzling thorax skewers, glazed briver ribs, and an intimidating platter of what looked like glowing, honey-coated claws. Reflar took its place as the announcer, its voice booming across the arena. "Beings of Nexus Prime, prepare yourselves for an unprecedented display of consumption prowess. The human challenger, Thomas Calder, will face the finest eaters the Ruvan have to offer. Who will emerge victorious? Let the contest begin." The crowd roared as the timer started. Thomas approached the competition with the same measured strategy as before. He began with the farkle haunches, efficiently stripping the tender meat from the bone. Across the table, the Ruvan Elite attacked the platters with a synchronized intensity that was both impressive and unsettling. As the minutes ticked by, the difference in styles became apparent. The Ruvan Elite relied on brute speed, tearing through dishes with almost mechanical precision. Thomas, on the other hand, maintained his steady pace, focusing on consistency and conserving energy. The first major challenge came in the form of the glowing claws. The meat was encased in a shell that required cracking, and the sticky glaze made it difficult to handle. While the Ruvan competitors struggled to break the shells efficiently, Thomas pulled a small nutcracker-like tool from his pocket, a gift from a vendor he'd met earlier, and set to work. Resourceful Reflar muttered, watching in disbelief as Thomas navigated the claws with ease. The crowd cheered louder with each passing minute, the excitement building to a fever pitch. Two of the Ruvan Elite began to falter, their movements slowing as they reached their limits. Only one remained, a towering figure named Galactic, whose stamina seemed almost unshakable. But Thomas wasn't slowing down either. He moved on to the briver ribs, carefully peeling away the sticky, caramelized layers with practiced hands. His focus was unwavering, and despite the growing ache in his stomach, he refused to give in. The final minutes of the contest were a blur of movement and sound. The arena was filled with the rhythmic clatter of utensils, the cheers of the crowd, and the occasional groans of overstuffed competitors. When the timer finally buzzed, Thomas leaned back in his chair, his plate cleared to the last morsel. Galactic sat across from him, visibly struggling to keep its composure. Reflar approached the table, its antennae twitching nervously. The results are in. The human has once again emerged victorious. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause, and Thomas couldn't help but grin. Reflar stared at him, its expression a mixture of frustration and reluctant admiration. How? How does a single stomach being achieve such feats? Thomas shrugged, still catching his breath. It's not about biology, it's about heart. And maybe a little practice with some seriously spicy buffalo wings back home. As the cheers of the crowd echoed around him, Thomas realized that this wasn't just a victory for himself, it was a victory for humanity. Against all odds, he had proven that humans were more than capable of holding their own, even in the most unexpected arenas. The aftermath of Thomas's second victory was pure chaos. The arena buzzed with energy as spectators swarmed the human champion, their expressions a mix of astonishment and curiosity. Delegates from dozens of species pushed forward, each eager to congratulate or interrogate him. "Did you even reach your limit?" asked a four-limbed Aquarian, its translucent head rippling with excitement. "Do humans metabolize food at an accelerated rate?" inquired a scientist from the Vulcan Consortium, its segmented fingers rapidly typing notes into a glowing datapad. Reflar, meanwhile, paced furiously near the table, its antennae twitching with what could only be frustration. This is unacceptable, it muttered, more to itself than anyone else. 2 victories? Against Ruvan champions? The council will never let me live this down. Thomas leaned casually against the now empty table, dabbing at his mouth with a napkin. He was tired, yes, but the rush of victory kept him upright. You're really taking this hard, aren't you, Reflar? Reflar spun to face him, its emerald eyes narrowing. You think this is a joke? The Ruvan pride themselves on their capacity for consumption. It's a cornerstone of our culture. To be defeated not once but twice by a human is humiliating. Thomas smirked. Maybe it's time to expand your cornerstone. Ever heard of humility? It pairs nicely with all that meat. The crowd erupted into laughter, and Reflar's chitinous face darkened with embarrassment. Before it could respond, a new voice cut through the commotion, a deep, resonant tone that silenced the entire arena. Enough. The crowd parted as a towering figure stepped forward. It was a Ruvan elder, distinguished by the intricate gold patterns etched into its exoskeleton and the ceremonial sash draped across its shoulders. Its name, Thomas learned later, was Venkar, and it carried an air of authority that demanded respect. Human, Venkar said, its voice steady but cold. You have proven yourself formidable, but your victories have stirred discontent among the Ruvan delegation. It seems a decisive resolution is required. Thomas raised an eyebrow. Decisive resolution? You're not thinking of another contest, are you? Venkar's antennae twitched. Precisely. But this will not be an ordinary challenge. If you are willing, you will face the Ruvan Apex, a competition that transcends mere eating. It is a test of endurance, strategy, and consumption on a scale unmatched by anything you have encountered before. The crowd buzzed with murmurs. The Ruvan Apex was legendary, a trial so grueling that even seasoned Ruvan champions approached it with trepidation. Thomas tilted his head, considering the offer. What's the catch? Venkar's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. The catch, human, is survival. The dishes presented in the Apex are not only vast in quantity but diverse in form. Some are challenging to digest. Others require ingenuity to consume. It is not merely a contest of appetite but of adaptability. The Reflar interjected, its voice laced with smugness. You could refuse, of course. No one would blame you for bowing out. Thomas straightened, his expression hardening. I've come this far. What's one more contest? The arena erupted into cheers and Venkar inclined its head. Very well. The Apex will be held tomorrow. Prepare yourself, human. You will need every ounce of resolve. The next morning, the arena had been transformed into something out of a fever dream. The table at the center stretched nearly the length of a starship, piled high with the most exotic and challenging dishes the galaxy had to offer. There were steaming platters of Virak steaks, whose fibrous texture was said to be nearly indestructible. Bowls of pulsating Glorn jelly, a dish infamous for its slippery nature. Massive slabs of torque beast ribs, their spicy glaze emitting visible waves of heat. And finally, an ominous platter of glistening Morthak tendons, a delicacy so chewy, it was nicknamed Jawbreaker. Thomas arrived to find a crowd larger than any he'd seen before. Word of the contest had spread far beyond Nexus Prime, drawing spectators from neighboring systems. His opponent, Venkar, stood at the opposite end of the table, its imposing presence underscored by the reverent silence of the Ruvan delegation. Reflar, serving once again as the announcer, raised its arms dramatically. Beings of the galaxy. Today we witness history. The human challenger faces the Ruvan Apex, a contest so grueling it has humbled the mightiest of champions. Will the human's luck finally run out, or will he achieve the impossible? The timer was set for 45 minutes, and the rules were simple: consume as much as possible, while navigating the unique challenges of each dish. Begin, Reflar shouted. Venkar immediately launched into the torque beast ribs, its mandibles snapping through the meat with mechanical precision. Thomas, unfazed, started with the Virak steaks. He quickly realized the challenge: the fibrous meat was so tough, it felt like chewing leather. All right, he muttered to himself, grabbing a knife. he began slicing the steaks into thin strips, a technique that allowed him to chew and swallow more efficiently. As he moved to the Glorn jelly, he found his next obstacle. The dish was nearly impossible to grip. It slipped through his fingers like a living creature, causing him to fumble repeatedly. Around him, the crowd roared with laughter and cheers. "Okay, sticky hands it is," Thomas said, dipping his fingers into the jelly and scooping it into his mouth like pudding. Venkar glanced at him, its expression unreadable, and then focused on the Morthak tendons. By the halfway mark, both competitors were showing signs of strain. Venkar's movement slowed as it tackled the spicy torque ribs, its mandibles clicking in irritation as the glaze began to overwhelm its senses. Thomas, meanwhile, had made significant progress but was visibly sweating, his face flushed from the heat of the ribs. With 10 minutes remaining, Thomas faced his final challenge, the Morthak tendons. They were tough, rubbery, and resistant to every attempt at cutting. He glanced at the crowd, then at the dish, before letting out a sigh. "Desperate times," he muttered, grabbing a skewer and wrapping a tendon around it. With a deep breath, he began gnawing his way through, his jaw protesting with every bite. The final seconds ticked down, and the crowd held its collective breath as the timer buzzed. Reflar stepped forward, scanning the table. Both competitors had made impressive progress, but when the remnants were weighed, it was clear Thomas had consumed just slightly more. Venkar nodded solemnly, extending a clawed hand. "Human, you have earned the respect of the Ruvan. Your determination is unparalleled." Thomas shook the elder's hand, grinning despite his exhaustion. "Thanks. But next time, maybe we settle things over coffee." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause, cementing Thomas's place in galactic history as the human who turned the galaxy's greatest appetite into a symbol of human tenacity and ingenuity. Thomas sat in the aftermath of his victory, the thunderous applause of the crowd still echoing in his ears. Despite his exhaustion, he managed a lopsided grin as a group of curious aliens gathered around him. Some were congratulating him, others asking rapid-fire questions about his species' biology and psychology. But as the crowd began to thin, a sense of calm settled over the arena. Venkar, the elder Ruvan, remained at the far end of the long table, observing Thomas with an air of contemplation. Finally it approached, its towering figure casting a long shadow across the human. "You have surprised us," human Venkar said, its voice measured but laced with a hint of admiration. "Not only with your capacity for consumption, but with your ingenuity and endurance. I must confess, we underestimated you." Thomas chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "You wouldn't be the first. Humans have a knack for exceeding expectations, especially when someone tells us we can't do something." Venkar's antennae twitched in what might have been amusement, a most peculiar trait. Perhaps it is why your kind has achieved so much in so little time on the galactic stage. Before Thomas could respond, Reflar scuttled forward, its emerald eyes glinting with a mixture of frustration and begrudging respect. "I will admit," it said, crossing its arms, "your performance was impressive. But I must ask, what drives you to push so hard? Surely no single victory is worth such strain." Thomas considered the question for a moment. "It's not just about winning," he said finally. "It's about what winning represents. You laughed at humans, called us weak, said we couldn't compete. Back home, we've faced challenges like that for centuries, whether it's surviving harsh environments, building civilizations, or just proving we belong. This was just a fun way to remind you not to count us out." Reflar tilted its head, clearly mulling over the response. "So, it is a matter of pride." "Not pride," Thomas corrected. "Determination. And maybe a little stubbornness." The crowd, still lingering on the fringes of the arena, erupted into cheers at his words. Venkar raised a clawed hand, silencing the noise. "Your words carry weight, human. Perhaps more than you realize. Today's contest may have begun as a challenge of appetites, but it has become something greater, a symbol of unity through competition." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Unity? Through stuffing our faces?" Venkar nodded solemnly. "Indeed. For centuries, the Ruvan have prided themselves on their unmatched capacity for consumption, but we see now that strength comes in many forms. You have shown us that even the smallest species can achieve greatness. It is a lesson we will not soon forget. Reflar's mandibles clicked, and it reluctantly extended a hand. You have my respect, human, though I still intend to train for the next opportunity to defeat you. Thomas laughed, shaking the offered hand. I'll be ready. As the arena began to clear, a familiar voice called out from the crowd. Thomas, over here. He turned to see a human delegate waving him over a tall, wiry man named Marcus, who had been part of the Earth team on Nexus Prime. Congrats, Champ Marcus said as Thomas approached. You've become something of a legend around here. Did you know they're already broadcasting your win across the galactic network? You're famous. Thomas groaned, rubbing his temples. Great. Just what I needed interstellar fame for overeating. Marcus clapped him on the back. Hey, it's not just about the food. You represented Earth out there. People are calling you a hero. I'm just a guy who likes a good steak, Thomas replied, though he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. As the two walked back toward the human delegation's quarters, Thomas caught snippets of conversations from passing aliens. The human strategy with the Morthak tendons was genius. I heard humans have competitions like this all the time. Incredible. Do you think we could import buffalo wings from Earth? By the time they reached their quarters, Thomas was exhausted but content. He slumped into a chair, letting out a long sigh. Think you'll retire from eating contests after this? Marcus asked, pouring 2 glasses of something vaguely resembling water. Thomas grinned. Retire? Nah, but next time I'm bringing barbecue sauce. The two shared a laugh, toasting to a victory that had started as a simple challenge but had become so much more. In the days that followed, Thomas's triumph continued to ripple across the galaxy. Delegates from various species approached him, not only to discuss his legendary appetite but also to learn more about humanity's unique qualities. For the first time, Earth's representatives found themselves at the center of interstellar conversations, not as an afterthought, but as equals. And while Thomas returned to his usual duties, the legend of the human who conquered the galaxy's greatest appetites lived on, a reminder that even the smallest species could leave a lasting mark on the cosmos.